on this wonderful fireside chat. I'm Roma Balwani. I'm the Director of Strategic Resources and Advisory Group, which advises on CSR, philanthropy, ESG, and communications. I'm also part of the DLC Global CSR and Philanthropy Committee. I was the former president of Vedanta Resources, a global mining company. And there my responsibility was again CSR, sustainability, brand, and communications. So over to you, Sianne.
Well, it's lovely to meet you too, Roma, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here talking about a very important topic of philanthropy and CSR. I'm Sianne Haldane, and I'm Chief Impact Officer at Munch. We help companies and other organizations to understand what their impact is and then track, measure, and report on their impact. I'm also a member of the STEP Global Philanthropy Advisors group, and I regularly give talks in London and other parts of Europe around philanthropy and CSR. I'm of course also a member of the DLC Global CSR and Philanthropy Committee, and similar to you, in a previous life when I started off my career, I used to work in a law firm in South Africa, and our work was really focused on CSR for large companies, and we did quite a lot of interesting work for mining companies. So I'm sure we'll have some interesting things to share in our conversation about that experience.
Absolutely, Sianne. I'm looking forward because I'm sure the kind of global perspective that you'll bring on this table today and what I can tell you about the Indian scenario will be a great way to, exchange notes and also share our thoughts with our audience.
Yes, absolutely. Looking forward to the discussion.
So I was just reminded of a quote which I just read very recently, where this person who was the former director of the Bank of England, his name is Joshua Charles Stamp, and this was way back, he was alive till 1941. He said, "It is easy to dodge our responsibilities, but we cannot dodge the consequences of dodging our responsibilities." I think that holds true for all of us today. If we see why any organization must do corporate social responsibility is only because they have to bring value to their business. I think corporate social responsibility now is far more critical as we impact not only society, but we impact the environment itself. So business responsibility has become center stage, and today every corporate, every individual, every community member has to participate. Without that, and with the advantage that we should have, that the governments themselves and the sovereigns are taking a lot of interest, and you're seeing what happened in COP26, that if we don't look at the society at large, the impact on environment, unless we have social performance which impacts as well as we can actually measure it, I don't think we'll be able to do justice to corporate social responsibility.
Absolutely. And I love the quote, and absolutely thinking about corporates as a critical player in how we can solve the global challenges that we have as society. We can't rely on governments to solve problems. And although philanthropy in its traditional sense of individuals giving discretionary capital towards solving challenges, that does play a huge role for sure, but it's just not enough. And corporates definitely have, they have so much to be able to contribute to these solutions, not only by leveraging their overall business assets or by, sort of giving gifts in kind, but also just through their sort of position of power often, sort of people identify with brands and can often be led by, what a brand is doing, even subconsciously, and it can be a real mobilizing force to see that a company is doing something, and we tend to kind of as consumers align with those companies that are doing good also. So I think that there's a role for all different entities to be playing in solving our global challenges. And you're right, if we can't necessarily track and measure some of these initiatives, how do we actually know what we're achieving overall, and how do we know then where we can have the most impact by having the right intervention? So definitely looking forward to talking about some of that. And one of the things that we're doing at Munch is using technology to help track and measure impact and to create that transparency, because I think absolutely transparency is important. I think gone are the days of companies, sort of issuing their sort of corporate social responsibility reports where there's just a nice story, sort of about something that they're doing, but actually you're really showing, sort of the numbers and how that sort of strategically fits in overall with what they're doing, and how that's relevant and material in their region and, sort of in that sector. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot to unpack in this discussion.
Sianne, I can agree with you on that, because we are in a modern digitalized world. And if we don't leverage that today, when are we going to do it? And today we have all the technology on hand, and we are seeing new technologies emerging every other day that people are using it in their business processes. At the same time, they're able to integrate it as a holistic management system. Today's CSR is no longer a feel good, do good, activity or away from the business responsibility. What I see, it has now become very holistic, very integrated and measurable. And I think it is not just the brand and the products itself. What we need to understand is what is it that they can look at being mindful, both in terms of what they're doing and how they are doing. I think that has become very, very imperative now.
Absolutely, I agree. There's definitely been an evolution in CSR. So I'm obviously speaking from a perspective, sort of where we work with primarily UK and European clients. And I think what we've seen changing is how CSR almost used to be something that was kind of bolted onto like a human resources function. And it would be, okay, like, let's do something like nice where we can all feel good about ourselves. And it wasn't necessarily really strategically thought through. It was, yes, there was the element of, okay, staff engagement and maybe thinking, okay, sort of in our local community, like what can we be doing as a business? But it's absolutely, sort of grown from there. And also from our perspective, I know we don't have the same CSR laws that you have in India, where companies are required to give a percentage of profits. But here in Europe, we're seeing increasingly that from the reporting perspective, that's what the regulation is driving much more strategic CSR activities. So there's a lot more requirements around the sort of non-financial reporting, and companies that have more than a certain number of employees. So once you reach over a certain threshold, so more than 350 employees, that's when you have to start actually reporting on what your, sort of non-financial activities are. And of course, sort of the way we think about CSR at Munch is, if we look at traditional CSR, like I said, it's almost like a side activity, but it's not really integrated into a business. And actually, that's where we think you should start. As a business, you have a purpose, you have a core purpose as a business. And actually, integrated into that purpose, there should be a sense of values. And one of those values should be around corporate responsibility. And in fact, we're actually seeing that there is, as I say, an increasing movement to really do this as businesses. So from a corporate governance perspective, there's now a driver actually in your initial purpose statement to have something about, as a business, we have an environmental responsibility, we have a social responsibility. So like I say, it's becoming a lot more integrated into a business from that perspective, which I think is great, because then it really does make almost everyone accountable, you know, all from leadership. Your board is really thinking about this. They're thinking about, actually, our role as a board is to drive a responsible business, a sustainable business. And then also it can trickle down into, you know, the rest of the business, where people see their overall, you know, sort of roles in a different light. If there's a thread of sustainability or responsibility running through that.
No, see, and I can agree with you. And you mentioned about India and the CSR 2% that every organization now has to set aside of their net profit. This has helped us center stage CSR for organizations who never thought of CSR. They were purely into business, but here with this focus, I think India is leading in getting about 500 listed companies now under this CSR 2% rule, which really makes them facilitate and also makes them introspect. Earlier, there was just an economic dimension, which the listed companies had to follow because they were accountable to their stakeholders, they were accountable to their employees, customers, and above all, their investors and their shareholders. So they would concentrate on that most of the time. And they also knew that there's a legal dimension. You mentioned governance, compliance. So those are the things that every organization does, because that's kosher and you have to do that. But what we are seeing now is the evolving of the philanthropic dimension, because mind you, in the Indian culture, right from the time a family unit is doing business, they set aside something for charity. And that was something which was in the DNA of every traditional business house, that they would set aside some amount for philanthropy. But that was very different as compared to now, when they've become larger, they've grown. But what we wanted to do was get smaller organization to be equally mindful, to be equally giving back to society, because we are a 1.4 billion people, and they definitely need to be looked after. As you rightly said, the government cannot look after everybody. So how do corporates or other institutions come forward and do what they have to do? And of course, we all sit on a multi-layered CSR activity where you're looking at people, you're looking at planet, you're looking at profit. At the same time, you follow the triple bottom line concept, because you have to report, and you have to report that in a way that is allowed and is acceptable to any of our rules and regulations. And we have a regulatory body, the stock exchange, which expects us to even make sure that what we are reporting is not just what we say, but what we do. And I think that has made a lot of difference in terms of our reporting structure, at the same time doing the right kind of work on the ground. And as you know, in the past, when the Sustainable Development Goals came up, most of them were to do with society. Most of them was to do with poverty, hunger, looking after the diversity, inclusion. All these really come together under the CSR umbrella. And that is something which has been very well received in India. And most of the corporates, I think, are doing very good amount of work in that space. Take, for example, Vedanta. We definitely, as a mining organization, and you rightly said that you've also had that experience, we have to retain our social license to operate. And if we are going to be taking something from earth, we have to give back to earth. And we have to make sure that the employees around there are safe. And for that, we have to definitely bring in a lot of CSR, which the government cannot really do. And I think for mining companies or manufacturing companies in and around the locations where they have their factories, apart from looking after the rules and regulations of compliance and environment, and now climate change, because that has become a buzzword, because you have to start now measuring your carbon footprint as well. So all these have to get tied up. And today what I see is the ESG goals are really bringing in the format of environment, bringing in social performance and governance all together under one umbrella. I think that is a change that you see in India and you see in many other parts of the world as well. But the shift from pure philanthropy, which in a simple definition is for any business or a business person, is the other side of the coin for wealth creation. Because unless he does philanthropy, his wealth creation cannot be really measured, or what is it that he can give back to society. So I think that shift has happened from every business house that we see in India. And this is something which I think is going to take the world forward. If you look at ESG in a holistic way and try to integrate that in your business goals. Right now, they are still as separate ESG goals, but I must say companies like in India, they're big companies like the Aditya Birla Group, the Tatas, the Mahindras, the Vedantas, they all have brought this to the fore, that every HR professional has put that in our KPIs for the senior management. So you have no choice but to ensure that you comply with that. So business cannot coexist without social responsibility. And I think that's a very important factor to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sort of, definitely, as you say, ESG is becoming recognized a lot more. And I think investors increasingly are also, they're the ones who are driving, they're driving this really. But I think, what we sort of see here is to go beyond ESG is important, because ESG is really, thinking about your risks as a business. You're thinking, what are our environmental risks? What are our social risks? What are our governance risks? And I think it's good to try and avoid just a box ticking exercise where it's just about compliance and just avoiding risks. And the way we like to, sort of think about it at Munch is like, how do we help companies like use ESG as an initial, the first step? And then you're thinking about what are the opportunities. That's not only the risks, like what are our opportunities now as a business that align with those, with the E, the S, and the G. And it's really then helping companies to be a bit more proactive and say, okay, so, we've identified what the risk is, and then trying to think of, what is the opportunity that sits next to that? And absolutely, as you say, it's thinking about, planet, people, prosperity, of course. And then the way we think you can really leverage the most amazing opportunities is partnerships, to the fourth P. And that's also, if you think about the UN, Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 17 is all about partnerships. And you can't do this on your own. I think that's an important thing also for companies to recognize is, you can definitely start thinking about it, but who can you work with in maybe the not-for-profit space to help you deliver on these goals, be they the social goals or the planet goals, to create more positive impact. And our vision is to say, how can we help companies become net positive companies? So we talk about net societal impact, and that's bringing together ESG, that's bringing together the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and also bringing, so it's ESG, CSR, and the SDGs all together. And if you have all of those, as you say, in a really holistic way, you make it strategic, this becomes the core of what your business drivers are, and you have a long-term view as a business. You want to be a sustainable business, you want to be existing in the long term, and to do that you have to be thinking about your other stakeholders. So your stakeholders are the planet, as well as people, your communities, your staff, And if you think that way, and you think of the opportunities that you can help deliver as a company, then we're on our way to hopefully, you know, sort of achieving a lot more positive outcomes, as well as being, you know, really profitable businesses. I've seen so much interesting research that has come out of London School of Economics on following companies that have a really strong strategic CSR, you know, sort of pillar, and they outperform all other companies. And this is because consumers want to, you know, sort of align with companies that have a strong sense of social responsibility. You attract talent. People want to work for companies that are doing good. And of course, you know, sort of investors are starting to turn away from, you know, sort of the companies that aren't doing such good. So, you know, overall, these companies are going to be the winners in the long run. And as you say, you know, obviously doing like sort of traditional philanthropy and just, you know, sort of giving, that's helpful. But if you're doing it in a way that's really strategic, and you're thinking about how does this tie in, you know, with our business, again, looking from that risk opportunity perspective, like how do we partner strategically with a not-for-profit, where it's not only about giving financially, of course that's helpful, but it's also like, how do we also maybe leverage other, you know, sort of assets in our business, like people for volunteering, but also not only that, but it's also, you know, is there anything like in terms of giving in kind or the talent in our business that we can, you know, sort of use to really drive a program. And I'll just give like a little example. We work with a large telecommunications company in Europe, and we know, you know, it's a challenge getting more females into, you know, science and technology and maths and, you know, those sorts of subjects, obviously. And as well as, you know, sort of more disadvantaged groups, because it's usually only accessible for some people, you know, those sorts of careers even. So what they've been doing, and what we've helped them with, is they've partnered with a not-for-profit that works with disaffected communities in the UK. And they have an apprenticeship program, they have a mentoring scheme, and ultimately they'll, you know, sort of start employing some of these people if they start working with them when they're quite young, you know. So it's really helping to drive something that's in an area that's, you know, sort of not necessarily accessible. So, you know, they're doing something on the people side that aligns with them as a business, but on the planet side equally, they lay network cables like on the seabeds, and, you know, sometimes they have to go through, obviously, you know, sort of other parts of nature that we'd rather have undisturbed. So they think about, you know, sort of in those areas, what can they then do? Who can they partner with to make sure that they're not just complying with regulations, but they're going beyond that. And they work with charities then to sort of see how they can give back in those areas where they've, you know, sort of maybe caused a bit of disruption. So I think it is about really thinking that through. And also, as you were saying now, with climate change, you know, companies are starting to think about carbon, you know, sort of credits and offsetting. And of course, that is a good solution, but it's not the only solution. Obviously, it's about trying to mitigate and reduce the harm. But then think about who you're partnering with well, and do it strategically. Do it in areas where you're having an impact, so that you actually are you know, sort of trying to create a bit more of a balance where you've caused harm.
Yes, I think we are all talking on the same lines.
Yeah.
And what I see is a value shift. I think today corporates understand that what is the value that drives them to work for the social objectives, not only for the business objectives, and for the betterment of the community and its people. So then it goes down to the fact that they also impact their brand building, their employer branding. Again, there is talent which comes to an organization which sees that there is a very clear, defined, you know, roadmap of CSR or ESG, and then they would like to join that kind of an organization. So I think it works well, and it's a win-win for both. Society benefits, the government benefits, the stakeholders benefit, and you have a workforce that is also committed to a common purpose. I think those are value propositions which have been completely changed in today's context. And I think we must admire the youth today because they are so discerning and they are the ones who really are driving the social change, even in organizations, because if they see that the organization is just focused on their business and not doing good for the society, I don't think they would like to join that organization. So I think these are various elements which create a holistic, integrated approach, like you said, to CSR. And definitely we can't ignore the environment and the governance, because for our stakeholders and our investors, they want to see tangible returns. So how do you measure them in financial returns? And today I can see a CFO of an organization aligning much better to a CSR activity because he sees that his bottom line is impacted if the community is not happy, if the productivity doesn't happen, if he doesn't have a green supply chain. All these tend to have a ripple effect. And if you look at it closely, you do good, you will be able to make sure that you get the right products to the right customers in the right way. So I think coming back to that phrase that you can't dodge the consequences and you must ensure that you're mindful of the consequences. And today I can see that shift, that people are mindful of the consequences, which probably was not there in an entire organization. It may have been a philanthropic way of charity earlier by just for wealth creation. Now it is a phenomenon which will impact every, as you rightly said, the SDG goals. We look at poverty alleviation because our Indian population is mostly in the rural areas. 70% exist over there, and quite a few of them are below the poverty line. And we have to ensure that we make sure that they get upgraded in their lifestyle or what they can afford as compared to even in an urban context. So I think these things drive, or they are the triggers which help us as organizations or corporates to be much more effective in what our social responsibility is and how do we tackle it. Also remember the other dimension in the past, or even in countries like South Africa or the African continent, or us also, there's a whole human rights issue. And you have to make sure that you are complying with that. And when you look at human rights, what are you doing? You're making sure that you're getting the right livelihood for them. They are not marginalized. They get everything that is due to them, and they are not taken for a ride as they were done in the past and exploited. So I think all these come together to create a very robust CSR strategy for every organization who is mindful, who is forward thinking, and wants to contribute back to society.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I was going to ask with what you've sort of seen in India, like, do you have any examples of who you think is doing something like really, really well in terms of a CSR strategy, and something that's, you know, sort of just been a partnership that you think, wow, that makes complete sense if they've partnered with a not-for-profit or if their corporate foundation is doing well? I'd love to hear. Yeah, just one example that you think is really good.
So I think many organizations do it in their own way, but skilling has become a key area, because if we don't skill the youth or the next generation, we are not able to really match the requirements of the industry or the potential of the industry and create what we call India as a, economic powerhouse. Today, if you look at India and the neighboring countries, we are a very significant part of the entire global population. And for that, it is important to look at skilling, which is a very important part. And a lot of organizations work on that. At Vedanta, I've seen it. I've seen it at Mahindra's. Also, what we have done at Mahindra's is look at creating a whole, a new generation of youth that can be skilled, even with the kind of projects that they can go and work and volunteer at. So unless they do that, their induction is not complete. And whether it is to do a plantation drive, we have a very large plantation drive, whether they go and work in the community to do that, they must do a 3-month stint with a NGO that is working in the local location. And that is how they start identifying with the purpose of the organization or the core values of the organization. I think Mahindra is a sterling example. I've seen at Vedanta, the focus has been on women and child. So we have these government centers which used to give a meal to a child between 0 and 6 years, and the mother could be there who can get some medical facilities, because anemia is something which is rampant in the rural part of India. So what Vedanta did is adopted almost now 3,500 such centers, which are actually run by the government, refurbished them, made them state of the art, gave them opportunities to have water, sanitation, food which is made with a lot of nutrition, also looked at solar panels to ensure that children between 3 and 6 get basic education. So televisions were put over there. Women then were skilled for the arts and craft that they knew, so that they can also become an earning member and they can have the pride in their families. Because, you know, with a patriarchal culture that we all have to face, they then get a sense of pride because they start becoming small micro entrepreneurs. We also collaborate with small banks so that they can get microfinance. And these women have benefited by that. We have several examples where these women who could not even step out of their homes, today they are entrepreneurs in their own right. Their family respects them, their children are happy, they are well fed, and the kind of medical facilities, we have vans running across these centers, which give you, the opportunity of getting yourself tested. And during the pandemic, I can't tell you how much of work was done, because these medical facilities came into good use, because we could not run the centers and get the children and the women over there, but we could run them as medical facilities. And that is what we did. We converted those centers, we ran them as medical facilities, got them to become COVID centers, and made sure that people were safe. I think these are the way you have to adapt, you have to be agile, and then you see how you can progress. And you know that India has been well established in the way they brought the vaccinations into the world and how they went forward. Our Prime Minister has done a lot of good work on that front. So I think India has progressed in the way they have redefined corporate social responsibility depending on the need of the hour. And disaster management now has become very key. And the other dimension that we are looking at for the youth is mental health. And all these we make sure that our CSR teams are equally responsible and they go the last mile. Because if we don't do that, we won't have a workforce which is skilled, which can also be mentally at peace in the surroundings that they are, which is why environment becomes important. And the governance is the ethical values that we bring into that community. I think it's a holistic approach, and it has a business dimension, it has an economic dimension, it has a legal dimension, but not to discount the fact that it has a very good philanthropic and CSR focus, which really brings everything together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you made an important point, because we didn't really even talk about like sort of COVID and the impact that's had. And I think COVID has been a real driver in this shift that we've been talking about in corporate social responsibility, and in making companies really think about their role, not only for their employees, but also wider stakeholder communities. We've absolutely seen, sort of how companies like suddenly realized, okay, like you were saying, mental health is much bigger, sort of thing that they need to be thinking about in terms of employee well-being. And also certainly, sort of how companies could step in and just support, you know, sort of with whatever assets they might have in helping with the pandemic. Like we heard really like great stories of, you know, sort of there's a company called The Entertainer in the UK, and they basically provide children's toys. So, you know, they have factories, they've got shops, you know, the retailers. And what they actually did, because obviously all the shops were closed and children's toys weren't seen as essential items, so of course those weren't, you know, sort of open, but they were incredible. And it's a family business, so not like a listed company, but a significant business in the UK. And they immediately, you know, sort of gave all of their delivery trucks to, you know, sort of whoever was delivering, like to local food banks to deliver food. They basically just gave, you know, sort of their fleet of vehicles to whoever needed them to distribute the vaccine, to distribute food. And they actually turned their warehouses into vaccine sites. So, you know, we've seen businesses doing like really great things like that also in that moment. And I think it's their response then kind of changed them forever in terms of how they think about CSR, because it almost like it made them realize, wow, actually, there's a lot more we can be doing as a business. And we could think about how we can be doing these sorts of things more long term also.
You know, for us in India, what was very, very challenging was to see that when businesses shut down and we have migrant labor and they had to go back to their hometowns and they were trudging, they were walking. And the first thing that struck me, and I told my CSR team at Vedanta, I said, please provide footwear. Their feet are blistered. And, you know, I had such emotional scenes coming to me, the pictures coming to me real time from my teams across the country where, you know, with a lot of humility, our volunteers actually made them wear the slippers, you know, bow down, make them wear the slippers. And there were tears in my eyes when I saw that. And I think that these are small gestures, but that also shows how culturally we need to connect, how emotionally we need to connect, and how we are able to tackle that situation so that we also leave that sense of pride. So for us, in the way we focus on CSR in India, there are basically 4 or 5 areas. Eradication of hunger, malnutrition and poverty, which is prime. Promotion of healthcare and sanitation, because sanitation is just not available in all our places. I mean, you can travel across the United States, Europe, you'll always find sanitation available, even in the hinterland. I mean, I've traveled all over the world. I feel that that is something which is so missing because of the poverty. And that is something I think sanitation and what we have done, the government has done, has been phenomenal. I think having a toilet in these places. And then the next thing is, because these people are not educated, if we don't give the primary education to a girl child and then you know, enhance the youth's vocational skills, I think if we do that right, we are able to have a nation which has more skilled power and they can at least fend for themselves. And last but not the least, you have to bring in gender equality. And gender equality is one dimension. The other is equality at large. Take, for example, I have just taken a pro bono assignment as we speak on disability sport, because there's no awareness on youth or anybody with disabilities, and how can we make them feel or bring them mainstream. And luckily for us, as part of our constitution, there is a Disability Act which tells you that please provide for such disabilities who can be given the opportunity to cultivate their sporting talent. And I have been looking at disability cricket, because there's so much of deaf cricket that we can look at, wheelchair cricket that we can look at, blind cricket that we can look at. So I'm focusing on that. And it gives me so much of emotional satisfaction that I'm able to mainstream some of them, also work with a collaboration. So there is a lady who was a banker, and today she is running what is known as Youth for Jobs. Now, what does Youth for Jobs do? They basically take these deaf and dumb youth, skill them, make them employable so that they can get into a job. Otherwise, they're going to go into places which is not meant for them. And what we have done, we know that cricket is religion in India and many other parts of the world. We wanted to mainstream this, at least I'm looking at the deaf and dumb and making sure that you get grassroots talent. We get them, trained so that they can participate in national tournaments as well as, participate in international tournaments. In fact, we conducted one of the first T20 Indian tournament, world tournament in India. We became the host country. And that was such a hit that everybody across the world, I mean, we had, participants from South Africa, from England, from Australia, from all over Asia. I think disability is something that we must look at as well for CSR. And that is something which I'm now concentrating on to give back in my small way, while organizations are doing their bit, but that's my personal contribution.
Yeah, I think we also seeing, as you say, like for like Europe, the sort of focus is much more on the environment, because, sort of obviously developed nations, we've managed to sort of get so far with certain aspects. Although there is still poverty in the UK, which is also shocking. Yes. There's still poverty, obviously, in the US. We know that, we've nowhere near, sort of having no poverty, but the environment is definitely, sort of a big focus area. And also thinking of the environment, thinking of life on land and life below water. So thinking of biodiversity and nature. And I think that's actually going to be, sort of one of the biggest challenges, really, because it really is about how do we sustainably develop, and not at the expense of our planetary resources. I've heard so many shocking statistics recently, because I'm also a member of the advisory board of a biodiversity impact fund for a Swiss private bank. So this fund invests in companies that are actually thinking about biodiversity, and we sort of working with those companies to really try and almost become nature positive. So we're helping them with strategies to really, as I was saying, again, you look at the risk and the opportunity, helping them, to become more positive ultimately. And it is, it's scary when we think we've used up 2/3 of our global planetary resources. Even our ocean, only 1/3 of the global oceans are still fine. 2/3 of our oceans aren't. And actually, where will we get food? Where will we get medicine? Where will we get clothes if we don't have those resources? So I think that's the big challenge actually coming up, for us as a global community, but also for companies to really start thinking about, is really bringing in that aspect of, you thinking about your supply chains. Of course, you have to think about all these things, human rights and development, but how do we then do this in a way that's going to not, sort of cause even more harm to nature? And I don't have the answers, but there's so many amazing things out there, that there's great initiatives. And again, it's about partnering, and it's about understanding who you can work with to help you do that in a better way, who you can work with to help you even think strategically about, how can you make your supply chains more sustainable? How can you give back to nature in a way that's generative? How can you change your practices so that you're not using chemicals, or you're not using so much water? Or so I think there's all these things that are really interesting, and it is a real balance. But yeah, it's definitely sort of the next challenge in the future of CSR is to be even more holistic thinking. and to really think of all these stakeholders.
I'm glad you mentioned biodiversity, because this reminded me that when we were looking at a zinc exploration project in a place called Hamsburg in South Africa, we had to really evaluate that location because it was a biodiversity hotspot, and we had to move the entire the rare plants which were there to another location and satisfy all the international norms to be able to then mine over there. And today we are very proud to say that the kind of foliage that we have saved and the way we have now put them in other locations, the green that we have created by changing that spot. And it was a hot spot, and people were very worried, the communities around. But I can tell you that the communities supported us. Today it's one of the largest mining project, and we have managed to ensure that we have not harmed the biodiversity over there in any manner. You know, that becomes very relevant, as you rightly said. You know, I was also reminded when you were talking about the ocean, recently, just in fact, yesterday, I was just browsing through our Mahindra Rise, portal, and they have a portal called Rise for Good, and they had put out a little video. And the video was, you know, there is a very nice pool, a swimming pool. There are many people swimming there, the family, the children, and they didn't notice that there was a hose pipe which was also there. And suddenly they found that hose pipe put into action and blowing out pieces of plastic into the swimming pool. And you could see the hue and cry which happened with all those mothers with children, and they started complaining to this person that how dare you do this? How can you put plastics and pollute a swimming pool where there are children? Don't you think about their health, and don't you think about polluting the environment? He then took 2 slides and he showed them the exact data, what is happening to our oceans. And he said just 12 pieces of plastic made you react so much. Can you imagine this colossal waste that we are putting out in the ocean? And can't we do something about it? You could have seen the look of embarrassment. I think it was a great social message. And Mahindra's has put out that video, because today, if we don't look after the biodiversity, we don't look after our ocean, all the natural reserves that we have, we are committing suicide. And I can't think of a better word, because you're doing it to yourself. You're not doing it to others. It's in your backyard.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest disasters created by people. Well, yeah, it's been so good speaking to you. I've really enjoyed our discussion today. I think, yeah, for me, probably some key sort of points, I think, for anyone who's starting to really consider their CSR strategy, and also thinking about philanthropy, would be around, okay, thinking about how it ties into your overall corporate purpose and values, and also really thinking about how you can deliver corporate social responsibility in a very strategic way. It's about leveraging what you're already doing, and really sort of being proactive about that. As I had mentioned before, at Munch, we help companies with this sort of work, and we also have tools to help you then track and measure and report on impact. Because transparency is important. How are we going to know how well we're doing against solving these challenges if we don't really know what we're doing at all or where we are?
I completely agree with you. These are the kind of offerings that we at Strategic Resources also provide to all the organizations who are actually not very mature in it. So what we have done is we have customized a sustainability and CSR maturity index. And that maturity index takes you through an entire process or a journey where you are, starting from the fact that you are compliant, and then how you can be a leader in the space that you are. And that journey is what we provide, the interventions we provide, we evaluate. I think these are new ways and methodologies that can really give you the interventions to be done as you progress. It's not after 3 years that you see what is it that you did and how did it impact. It is real time. It measures that success rate, and it also gives you the opportunity to course correct or create new solutions that can be viable in that environment, as we are in a very dynamic environment. What impacts us yesterday may be different tomorrow. So I think that's what Strategic Resources is doing, and very happy that you and I have actually had a conversation on various aspects which are common, but they are global and yet sometimes Indian in nature. But I think very important for both of us to really give to the audience the fact that CSR is not just doing good, it's how you're doing good. How can we provide that advisory services to you, and how we can create that impact, social impact for your organization, and a long-term impact to the planet as well. I think with that, I'd close my remarks, and thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much.